Welcome to Science for Sleepy Minds. You can let those words settle around you like a soft blanket. You've arrived here at the end of a long day, or perhaps in the middle of a restless night, and you don't have to do anything at all now. You don't have to respond or sit up or concentrate. You can just lie there however you are and let your mind slowly uncoil as we wander through a quiet story together. If you're feeling tired or overstimulated, or like your thoughts have been bouncing from one thing to another all day, that's completely okay. This space is meant for exactly that kind of mind. A little frazzled, a little full, maybe a little anxious. You don't need to push any of that away. You're allowed to bring it with you, and you're just as allowed to set it down gently for a while. Tonight we're going to drift back, far beyond human history, far beyond dinosaurs, even beyond the first forests and oceans we might picture from nature documentaries. We're going to visit the very first stirrings of life on Earth. The first living things were not what most of us imagine when we hear the word life, and together we'll gently explore why that is and what they might have looked like. If looked like is even the right phrase. We won't be meeting little cartoon creatures with faces, or tiny perfect cells appearing all at once like magic. Instead, we'll be visiting a softer idea. Life as a blurry process, unfolding in warm ancient waters, patterns of molecules that gradually learn to hold together, to copy themselves, to change. It's less like a sudden spark and more like the slow brightening of dawn. And you don't have to fully understand it. You don't even have to stay awake for it. This is not a lecture you have to remember. It's more like a bedtime story woven out of atoms and oceans and time. If you drift in and out, that's fine. If you miss whole pieces because your thoughts wander off on their own little side quest, that's fine too. The science will still be here, humming quietly in the background, like distant waves you only occasionally notice. So if at any point your eyes grow heavy, or your thoughts start to dissolve into half dreams, you can let sleep come. You have full permission to drift away from the words. Imagine yourself as a small boat, gently untied from the dock. The ropes are loosened, and you begin to float away further and further from the shore of the day into a calm, dark water where nothing is required of you at all. Before we go deeper, just a tiny, gentle note. If you enjoy falling asleep to these soft science journeys, you're welcome to support the channel with a like, or by subscribing so you can find your way back here on other nights. But not right now. Right now, you don't have to tap anything or decide anything. This moment is just for resting. The screen can be forgotten. The world can be on pause. For now, all I'd like you to do is notice your breath. You don't need to change it. Just feel it. The easy rise and fall of your chest or your belly. Maybe the way the fabric over your body moves a little with each inhale and exhale. The breath is already happening, whether you pay attention to it or not. But for a few quiet moments, you might let it be the main thing you feel. Perhaps you imagine it like a slow tide, moving in toward the shore as you breathe in, and drifting gently back out as you breathe out. Nothing dramatic, just that soft, steady motion, in and out, the air coming in a little cooler and leaving a little warmer, carrying the leftover tensions of the day away from you, out into the darkness where they can simply dissolve. If it feels comfortable, you might deepen the breath just a touch. Not forcing it, not straining, just allowing the inhale to be a little fuller, and letting the exhale linger slightly longer, like a sigh you forgot you were holding. In through the nose if that's easy, out through the nose or mouth, whichever is softer for you. If that feels like too much effort, you can simply let the breath go back to its own rhythm. There are no rules here. Maybe on the next exhale, you imagine that you're breathing out the static of the day. The little leftover fragments of conversations, notifications, worries, to-do lists. You don't have to solve any of them. You can simply let them drift out with the breath, floating away like dandelion seeds caught in a gentle breeze, fading into the background. As you breathe, you might notice your face, the muscles around your eyes, your cheeks, your jaw. So many of us hold tension here without noticing. If it feels okay, allow your eyelids to be as heavy or as light as they want to be. They might already be closed. They might be half closed. Wherever they are is fine. Imagine a faint warmth spreading across your forehead, like sunlight filtered through a thin cloud, melting any tightness there. Let that warmth trickle down, softening your eyebrows, releasing the tiny muscles at the corners of your eyes. You don't have to hold any particular expression. You don't have to look alert or interested or on. You can let your face fall into whatever shape it wants when it's simply resting. Your jaw can loosen. Maybe your lips part slightly, or they stay gently closed. Either way, you're allowed to let gravity do the work. That sense of softening can drift down into your neck, into the space at the back of your throat, into the base of your skull. If your shoulders have been living up near your ears all day, maybe you let them down, as if the bed beneath you is rising up to meet them, taking over the job of holding everything up. You might imagine any heaviness sliding down your arms, past your elbows, wrists, and fingertips, and into the mattress or pillow beneath you like water soaking into sand. Your chest can be spacious and loose, moving gently with each breath, your ribs expanding a little as you inhale, and settling back into a comfortable place as you exhale. There is nothing you have to brace yourself against right now. No impact to prepare for, no conversation to rehearse. Just this gentle inflow and outflow of air, like waves slipping in and out along a quiet shore at night. Let your attention glide down through your back, noticing any spots that feel tight or uncomfortable, but not trying to fix them, just acknowledging them, the way you might nod to a passing stranger. Then imagine that with each breath out, a tiny bit of that tension seeps downward, into your hips, into your legs, and eventually into the surface that supports you. Your hips and thighs can grow heavier, as if they are being cradled by the bed. Your knees, calves, ankles, and feet can follow, each one invited to soften and sink. If it helps, picture yourself lying on warm sand. As you relax, the sand gently reshapes itself around you, making the perfect imprint for your body. You don't have to hold yourself up or in. The earth is doing that for you. If your mind wanders off at any point while you do this, that's normal. Minds love to wander. You don't have to chase it or scold it. When you notice it, you can simply invite it back, perhaps by feeling the next breath or noticing the weight of your body. The wandering and returning can be as gentle and unhurried as waves rolling in and receding again. If you'd like, you can add a little image to keep you company. Maybe you picture yourself floating on a slow-moving river under a twilight sky. The air is mild, the water is calm. You're lying back on something buoyant and safe, and you barely feel any movement at all. Just the occasional whisper of current beneath you carrying you along. You don't know exactly where it's going, and you don't need to. There's nothing you have to steer. Or perhaps you imagine yourself resting in a pool of warm, golden light. The light ebbs and flows with your breathing, brightening a little as you inhale, dimming slightly as you exhale, as if the light itself is breathing with you. It doesn't ask anything of you. It doesn't need you to be productive or impressive. It's simply there, keeping you company, bathing you in a quiet softness. As we move into the story of early life, you can think of each idea as a distant star in the sky of your mind. You're lying on the ground, looking up. The stars appear and fade, and you don't need to catalogue them or remember their positions. You can just notice them when you feel like it, and let them drift by when you don't. Now, still held by the bed or the couch or whatever surface is beneath you, let's begin to travel. Not in space, but in time. Imagine the Earth as you know it now. Blue oceans, swirling clouds, continents with cities and forests. Then slowly, gently let that picture wind backward. Watch the lights of the cities fade. The buildings dissolve. The forests retreat. Mountains soften and change shape. The continents rearrange themselves, sliding slowly across the globe like rafts of rock on a deep hidden sea of stone. Keep winding back, beyond dinosaurs, beyond the first land plants, beyond any trace of animals or trees. The sky changes. The air becomes different. The map you know from school no longer exists. We are moving back billions of years, until we find ourselves at a time more than 3.5, maybe even 4 billion years ago, when Earth was very young. It's still the same planet, but it feels like a different world. In your mind's eye, you might see dark oceans stretching almost everywhere. There are no green fields, no cities glittering at night, no roads or farms. Maybe there are a few scattered volcanic islands, rough and newly formed, their edges slowly crumbling into the sea. The sky above looks strange, perhaps tinted in colours you don't usually see. The sun may appear dimmer or more diffuse through a thicker atmosphere. This world is quieter in some ways and wilder in others. Remember, though, that we are only visiting in imagination. You are still safe and warm where you are. You're not standing on a dangerous shore. You're more like a dreamer looking through a window at a picture in an old book. You can turn the page at any time. You can drift away at any time. Everything we look at is happening very far away and very long ago. Now picture yourself hovering above a deep ancient sea, as if you are gently held in a clear bubble of air. It's dusk, or something like dusk, though the colours are different. The water beneath you is vast and dark, stretching endlessly in every direction. The surface is mostly calm with slow rolling swells. The air feels warm and humid against your skin, like standing near a bath that's been drawn just right. In the distance, far on the horizon, you might see a few faint glows, where volcanic activity sends out a dull orange light. Like embers scattered along a line, they don't roar or explode in your mind's version of this world. They simply smoulder quietly, reminders that the planet is still young and full of inner warmth. Overhead, the sky may hold a different pattern of stars, and perhaps the moon, newer and closer than it is now, hangs larger and brighter above the horizon. If you listen, you might imagine the low, rhythmic sound of waves, not crashing, just sliding and withdrawing like a slow heartbeat spread across the surface of the planet. The bubble you're in feels completely safe, suspended just above the water. Nothing can reach you here. You're a silent witness from far in the future, looking back at a world that has no idea you exist. Now comes a gentle question. If we could watch patiently, what would we see when life is just beginning? Would we see a tiny creature suddenly pop into existence, complete and perfect like a character appearing in a comic strip? Probably not. The first stirrings of life would be so small, so fragile and so slow that to our human eyes they might barely look like anything at all. The first life might not have been a single tidy organism. It may have been more like patterns forming in the water, little clusters of molecules that manage to hold together slightly longer than others, droplets that trap interesting combinations of chemicals, reactions that almost, but not quite, resemble the kind of self-sustaining processes we see in cells today. It's a world of almosts and maybes, repeated over and over for millions of years. When you think of the history of life on Earth, your mind might jump to familiar scenes. Dinosaurs roaming through dense forests, fish exploring ancient seas, giant ferns, early mammals, strange trilobites crawling at the bottom of oceans. Or you might imagine a simple diagram from school, a single round cell labelled First Life, sitting alone in a drop of water, as if someone had drawn a circle and declared, "This is where it all began." Those images are cosy in their own way. They give us a clear starting point, like the first bead on a necklace. But reality is often messier and softer around the edges. If you've seen those neat evolution ladders in textbooks, with one creature turning into another in a straight line, you might picture life as a staircase. First one species, then a different one all the way up to us. The truth, as far as we can tell, is closer to a tangled bush, or a vast, branching tree with countless twigs that sprout and wither and disappear. The same is likely true for the very beginning. The first life was probably not a single step, but a long, blurry slope. Imagine someone learning to write. At first, their marks on the page are just random scribbles. Then slowly they start to resemble shapes, circles, lines, then letters, then words. There is no single pen stroke where we can say, "Ah, now this child is officially writing." It's a gradual unfolding. Life's first sentence took an unimaginably long time to form. Simple molecules bumping into each other in water, then slightly more complex molecules, then little clusters and compartments. It might feel less like a switch being flipped and more like a dawn that stretches across millions of years. The sky brightening so slowly you could never say exactly when night became day. So what does it mean then to say something is alive? At what point does a self-organizing, self-copying chemical system become a living thing? Is it when it can make copies of itself? When it can use energy from its surroundings? When it can change in ways that help it survive? Scientists still debate this, and there may not be one perfect answer. For our sleepy purposes, we don't have to pick a precise line. We can simply hold the idea that life emerged from non-life gradually, through countless tiny experiments in chemistry. Some of those experiments fizzled out quickly, others lingered, changed, combined, and learned new tricks. It's less like a single spark and more like a glow spreading through a dark room, moving from corner to corner and growing brighter and more complex as time passes. There's something comforting about that, perhaps. Instead of a harsh, sudden beginning, there is a slow unfolding. Instead of needing to know the exact moment life began, we can let that mystery sit with us like a soft fog over a landscape. You don't have to see every detail of the hillside to appreciate its shape. Sometimes the fog makes everything feel quieter, more magical, less sharp. To understand this hazy beginning a little better, it helps to look at the stage itself, the young Earth, slowly preparing its conditions and ingredients. Picture the planet in those early days, still cooling from its fiery birth. For a long time the surface would have been too hot and unstable for liquid water to linger, but as time passed, the crust thickened and the first oceans began to gather. Imagine rain that falls not for hours or days, but for thousands, even millions of years, slowly filling low places with water. Volcanic gases and steam vent into the air. The sky might be thick with clouds and mists as the atmosphere changes. Gradually the heat of the surface drops to a point where water can stay in its liquid form. Shallow pools form near volcanic coasts. Deep basins fill with vast, dark oceans. There are no trees bending in the wind yet, no grass, no flowers. The continents, if we can call them that, are mostly bare rock, maybe with patches of simple minerals and dust. The landscape might feel stark, but it's also full of potential. The planet is gathering ingredients, liquid water, a mix of gases in the air, a variety of minerals in the rocks, and an internal heat source that will drive currents and circulation. Water especially is important. In your own life, you might think of water as something you drink or swim in or listen to when it falls as rain. But for chemistry, water is also a kind of playground. In liquid water, molecules can move freely, bumping into each other, forming and breaking bonds. Reactions that would be almost impossible in a rigid solid become possible in this flowing medium. You can picture water as a dance floor for atoms and molecules. In a solid, everyone is stuck in their seats. In a gas, everyone is scattered too far apart to do much together. In a liquid, though, the dancers can swirl around, meet new partners, and form new patterns over and over. Early Earth, with its new oceans and pools, was setting out an enormous dance floor. Within this water, we find the basic characters of life's story. Elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. You might remember some of these from school, but you don't need the details now. You can imagine them as a small cast of actors ready to take on different roles. Carbon, especially, is very good at forming bonds with other atoms, making long chains and complex shapes. It's like a flexible connector, able to form the backbone of many different structures. Around our imaginary bubble above the ancient sea, volcanic gases and other emissions mix into the air and dissolve into the water. Molecules like water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, ammonia, they sound a bit abstract, but you can think of them as simple building blocks. Under the influence of energy, from sunlight or from the heat inside the Earth, or from lightning in the thick atmosphere, these small molecules can sometimes rearrange themselves into more complex ones. When you picture lightning here, you don't need to imagine sudden, violent storms. You can think of occasional bright flickers through a heavy sky, like brief camera flashes illuminating the surface of the ocean. Each flash delivers a little burst of energy, which can nudge molecules into new arrangements. Quietly, patiently, the planet experiments. Beneath the surface of the sea, there are other sources of energy as well. Hot vents along the ocean floor where mineral-rich fluids pour out into colder water create steep chemical gradients, differences in temperature and composition that can drive reactions. These gradients are a little like hills that molecules can roll down, releasing energy as they go. You don't have to visualize the details, only the idea that early Earth provided many ways for an energy to flow. It might help to imagine invisible currents of warmth and chemistry moving through the seas, weaving around each other like soft, slow streams of color. Where two streams meet, something new can happen. A bond breaks, a bond forms, a new molecule appears, lingers for a moment, and then disappears again. Or perhaps it persists, just long enough to find another partner and build something more complex. Over millions of years, the planet gradually settles. The rate of impacts from space slows down. The crust thickens. The oceans become more stable. There are still changes, still eruptions and quakes, but they are no longer constantly resetting the surface. In this relative stability, more delicate structures and reactions can survive for longer stretches of time. It's as if the room has finally become calm enough that someone can build a house of cards without it being knocked over every second. You might imagine the young Earth as a very messy room slowly becoming more organized. At first, objects are being thrown around constantly, nothing stays in place. But as the tossing slows, the room begins to tidy itself just a little. A table stays where it is. A shelf remains undisturbed long enough for something to rest on it. In that environment, small treasures can finally find a home. This is the stage on which the first building blocks of life begin to appear, not in a single location, but in many pockets and corners. Shallow pools that heat and cool each day, deep ocean vents where hot and cold meet, surfaces of rocks and minerals that can help molecules line up in unusual ways. Everywhere, tiny experiments are taking place, driven by energy, time, and the restless nature of atoms seeking new arrangements. As we go on, we'll explore what those building blocks might have been like and how they could have come together to form the patterns we now call life. For now, you can rest with this picture of a young planet, wrapped in clouds, covered in oceans, slowly settling into itself. A world that has no idea you are watching it, yet is quietly preparing molecule by molecule for your existence billions of years in the future. You don't have to hold the timeline in your head. You don't have to remember any numbers or names. Just feel the gentle contrast between your body, warm and still, resting in the present, and this distant world, far in the past, full of possibility. The same atoms that once swirled in those early seas now flow through you. And as you breathe slowly in and out, you might feel, just for a moment, that long, patient continuity. From ancient oceans to this quiet room, from restless chemistry to a mind that is finally allowed to rest. If you listen to the earlier part of this journey and you're still awake, you can think of this as a gentle continuation, like turning the page of a very quiet book. And if you've just arrived here on its own, that's okay too. You don't need to know what came before. You don't need to remember anything at all. You can simply let the words wash over you and take from them whatever feels soft and comforting. Wherever you are, you're allowed to be exactly as you are. Maybe you're lying on your back or curled onto your side. Maybe the room is dim or dark. Maybe there are small sounds in the background. A fan, distant traffic, the hum of a fridge. All of that can stay exactly as it is. You don't have to create perfect conditions. This moment doesn't have to be special. It just has to be yours. If you're still awake enough to notice, you might gently return your attention to your breathing for a moment. Feel that slow rise and fall again, like a tiny tide moving through your chest. You don't have to deepen it or control it. Just noticing is enough. You might imagine that with each exhale, your body settles a little more into the surface beneath you, as if the bed is learning your shape and wrapping around it. You might also notice how your thoughts feel right now. Maybe they're calmer, maybe they're still busy. Maybe they drift in and out like clouds. Whatever they're doing is fine. You don't have to silence your mind. You don't have to meditate correctly. You're allowed to be a human being with a busy brain, listening to a story about very small things on a very large timescale and letting yourself be carried. Earlier, we floated above a young Earth, still settling into itself. We imagined dark oceans stretching almost everywhere, volcanic islands glowing faintly at their edges, a sky heavy with unfamiliar colours. We pictured water as a great dance floor for chemistry, where simple molecules met and parted under the guidance of energy from sunlight, from the Earth's interior, from quiet flashes in the thick air. Now we're going to lean in closer, not so close that it becomes confusing, just close enough to notice some of the shapes in this dance. We'll meet the basic building blocks that life uses, the way a language uses letters and words. You don't have to remember their names like a list. Think of them instead as characters in a story, each with a role to play. You can imagine life as a kind of sentence written in the language of chemistry. Today that sentence includes your body, your thoughts, your memories, your breath. But long before anything like you existed, the alphabet itself had to be assembled. The shapes of the letters had to be invented and tested and changed. On early Earth, this was happening everywhere, in tiny scattered ways. One way to picture this is to think of beads and strings. The simplest molecules, small and plain, are like single beads scattered across a table. On their own, They don't say much, but if you start to thread them together, patterns emerge. Necklaces, bracelets, long coils that can twist and fold. Life's building blocks are like special kinds of beads that can be arranged into endless combinations, each with a different functional meaning. Among these there are molecules that will one day become the workhorses of living cells, amino acids and the proteins they form. Others will become carriers of information, nucleotides that link into RNA and DNA. Others still will form the soft borders and walls that hold things together. Oily molecules that gather into droplets and membranes. Sugars and other small structures will fill in the spaces, acting as energy storage and scaffolding. Let's start with amino acids, slowly and simply. An amino acid is a small molecule with a particular shape, built around carbon and nitrogen and other common elements. On their own, they are modest, unassuming, but they have a special talent. They can link together in long chains. When they do, they form proteins, which are essential pieces of almost everything living cells do. In your own body right now, proteins are everywhere. They help build muscle and skin. They carry signals. They catalyze chemical reactions so that they happen fast enough to support life. You can imagine proteins as little tools or machines, each with a shape that lets it do a particular job. Some are like flexible strings, others like tiny folded keys that fit perfectly into specific locks. On early Earth, long before there were cells or muscles or brains, it appears that amino acids could form under fairly simple conditions. Experiments on our modern Earth have shown that when mixtures of simple gases are exposed to energy, like electrical sparks standing in for lightning, amino acids can appear spontaneously in the resulting soup. Other environments like meteorites and interstellar dust also seem capable of carrying these small molecules. You don't have to hold on to the names or the exact processes here. It's enough to know that the universe seems surprisingly generous with these basic building materials. They are not rare jewels, but simple common pieces that appear wherever conditions are right. You can imagine them quietly accumulating in shallow pools, in droplets, in layers of water sitting on mineral surfaces, waiting for the next step in the dance. Another set of building blocks just as important are nucleotides. These are the pieces that later on will form long chains like RNA and DNA. If proteins are tools and machines, RNA and DNA are more like written instructions and memories. They don't just do things, they store information about how to do them again. Each nucleotide is a small cluster of atoms that can link to the next, forming a long strand. On this strand, the order of nucleotides matters, the way the order of letters in a sentence matters. Change the sequence and you change the message. In modern cells, DNA holds the long-term instructions and RNA acts as a kind of flexible assistant, carrying messages and, in some cases, helping to build proteins. But on early Earth, long before there were cells to read this writing, individual nucleotides may have drifted through water, forming, breaking apart, forming again. Sometimes by chance, a short chain might have assembled. Maybe it fell apart quickly, maybe it held together just a little longer than usual. Maybe it interacted with a surface or a droplet that protected it or helped it grow. To imagine this, you might picture a beach made of tiny, tiny magnetic beads. The waves roll in, tossing the beads around. Some of them happen to line up and stick together. The next wave jostles them. Some chains break. Others grow. Over endless cycles of movement, patterns emerge, even without anyone designing them. Life's early information molecules might have begun to behave in a similar way, shaped by chance and time. Then there are lipids, fat-like molecules that behave in a curious, useful way when they meet water. One end of a lipid molecule is attracted to water, and the other end is repelled by it. When enough of them are floating in water together, They tend to arrange themselves into spheres or layers, with their water-loving ends facing the outside and their water-avoiding ends tucked safely inside. You've probably seen something like this in everyday life. A drop of oil in water breaks into smaller droplets, each one rounding itself off into a little sphere. Soap bubbles float on the surface, forming delicate membranes. On early Earth, similar hulled structures could have formed spontaneously. Tiny bubbles and droplets with thin skins made of lipids, enclosing small volumes of water and whatever molecules happen to be inside. You can close your eyes and picture this on a very small scale. In the warm dimness of an ancient pool or sea, countless microscopic bubbles are forming and popping and forming again. Each one is a miniature room, a little container where chemistry can be slightly different from the water outside. Inside some droplets there might be proteins or protein-like chains. In others, short strands of nucleotides. In most there is nothing special at all, just water and a few scattered molecules. But here and there, by chance, a droplet might trap an interesting combination. When you imagine these droplets, you might see them as tiny orbs of pale light suspended in the water, even though in reality they would be invisible to the naked eye. They shimmer gently, moving with the currents, bumping against rocks and each other. Some merge, some split apart, most leave no trace, but together, over vast stretches of time, they create a canvas for something new to develop. In addition to these building blocks, there are sugars and other small molecules which can act as sources of energy and as structural components. You don't need to know their chemistry to understand their role. They are like the grains of sand that fill in gaps between stones, the background material that supports more complex structures. Piece by piece, the early Earth is accumulating a toolkit. If this begins to feel like a lot of pieces, you can imagine zooming out again. See the whole process not as a crowded list of names, but as a gentle pattern, simple things combining to form more complex things. Just as letters form words and words form sentences, so small molecules form larger ones, which can then take on new behaviors. The details can float by like leaves on a stream. You don't have to grab them, just notice the direction of the flow. One of the helpful things about early Earth is time. Vast, nearly unimaginable amounts of time. Millions of years, hundreds of millions, long enough for every possible combination of conditions to be tried again and again, long enough for small, improbable events to happen not once but many times. You can think of the planet as taking a very long, very slow breath, experimenting with arrangements of matter every moment. In your own life, you might feel rushed. Days feel short, schedules feel tight. It's comforting in a way to remember that the world you're lying on now was shaped by processes that had no hurry at all. Molecules drifted, droplets formed and vanished, reactions succeeded and failed. And through all of this, there was no alarm, no deadline, only the quiet persistence of natural laws unfolding. So we have a stage, a young Earth with water, energy, and a generous supply of building blocks. We have an enormous amount of time. What comes next is the slow crossing of a blurry threshold, from mere chemistry to the first hints of what we might reasonably call life. A common way people imagine this is in terms of a primordial soup. The idea goes something like this. Early oceans or pools were filled with a rich mixture of molecules. Within this soup, random reactions took place until, one day, by chance, a molecule or a set of molecules appeared that could make copies of itself. From there, evolution could begin. The soup image is useful in some ways, but it can also be misleading. It suggests that there was a single uniform pot of chemicals, like a big bowl of broth. In reality, the Earth's surface is varied even in its youth. There are deep oceans, shallow coastal pools, hydrothermal vents, mineral beds, evaporating ponds, icy highlands, and more. Each environment offers different conditions, different temperatures, different concentrations, different kinds of minerals and gases. Instead of one pot of soup, you might imagine many little kitchens scattered across the planet. In each kitchen, the same basic ingredients are available, but in different proportions and under different lighting and temperature. Some kitchens are too hot and everything burns away. Some are too cold and nothing much happens, but some are just right, at least some of the time, for interesting chemistry to take place. In some of these environments, one family of molecules might take the spotlight, the nucleotides and the strands they form. Scientists have proposed that early life may have passed through a phase often called an RNA world. You don't need to memorize that phrase. Think of it as a time when RNA, or something like it, played a starring role. RNA is a close relative of DNA. Like DNA, it can store information in the order of its nucleotides, but unlike DNA, RNA can also fold into shapes that allow it to act a bit like a protein, helping to speed up certain reactions. It is both a message and, in some cases, a tool. That dual ability makes it an appealing candidate for early lifelike systems. Imagine tiny strands of RNA forming in some corner of this ancient world. Most of them are short, unstable, easily broken by heat or water or light. But once in a while a strand might form that's just long enough or just stable enough to last for a while. Perhaps it folds in a way that lets it help assemble more copies of itself, or more nucleotides, not perfectly, not reliably, but just a little better than random. You could picture these strands as whispered instructions floating in the water. The whispers are faint and often garbled, and the water is noisy with other sounds. But every now and then, a whisper manages to repeat itself, or to teach another molecule to repeat a part of it. Over long periods of time, the clearer, more stable whispers might become slightly more common, while others fade into silence. At the same time, those lipid droplets we imagined earlier are still forming and dissolving. Sometimes, by pure chance, a droplet might trap one of these helpful RNA strands inside it, along with some of the building blocks it needs. The droplet doesn't know what it's doing. It has no intentions. It simply happens to create a microenvironment where the strand is protected and supplied. Inside such a droplet, things could be a little different. Molecules are closer together. Reactions might happen more often. When the droplet grows too large or is jostled by currents, it might split into two. If, by luck, both new droplets contain some of the useful strands and building blocks, they can continue the process. You can see how this begins to resemble a very simple form of reproduction, even though it's still a long way from true cells. Across the planet, countless droplets and microenvironments are going through similar cycles. Most have nothing special inside. Some have combinations that help reactions along but are too fragile to last. A few have just the right mix of protective membranes, helpful strands, and available energy sources to maintain their internal patterns a little longer. Nothing is conscious. Nothing is planned. Yet slowly, patterns that are better at persisting begin to dominate the landscape. Sometimes these reactions might be helped by surfaces. Minerals and rock textures can act like scaffolding, where molecules line up in particular ways. Imagine a flat rock with tiny grooves on it sitting in a shallow pool. As water flows over it and evaporates, molecules are carried along and left behind, collecting in the grooves. The next layer of water brings more, and so on. Over time, long chains might form simply because the surface encourages them to. You might think of these surfaces as shelves in a pantry. Instead of everything being mixed in a heap on the floor, the rocks offer places where pieces can be arranged, sorted, and assembled. When the tide comes in or the rain falls, the shelves are washed clean again, and the products of one cycle are carried elsewhere. When conditions repeat, similar patterns can be built again. There may also have been cycles of wetting and drying, pools that fill with rain or tide water and then slowly evaporate under the sun. When they're full, molecules can move easily and mix. As they dry, those molecules are pushed closer together, encouraging them to link into longer chains. Then the water returns, testing these chains, breaking some, preserving others. Over and over, like breath, in and out, wet and dry. If you're still awake enough to follow these images, notice how many rhythms are involved. The turning of the planet bringing day and night, the rise and fall of tides, the slow breathing of volcanic activity, of ocean currents, of changing climates. Each rhythm creates cycles of heat and cold, wet and dry, abundance and scarcity, that shape which molecules can form and survive. Sometimes thinking about all these processes can make your own life feel a little smaller, but there is another way to look at it. Your body, lying there in the dark, is the current expression of these same rhythms. You take in energy in the form of food, and you release it as warmth and motion. You breathe in and out, moving gases in and out of your internal ocean of blood. You too are a network of reactions enclosed in delicate membranes sustained by flows of energy. In those early days, before there were clear boundaries between self and environment, the first lifelike systems may have been little more than networks of reactions that fed into one another. One reaction produces a molecule that fuels another, which in turn makes a third, and so on, forming a loop. As long as energy and raw materials are available, the loop continues. As long as the loop continues, its pattern persists. There may not have been a single, well-defined individual to point to and say, "This is alive, and everything else is not." Instead, there could have been a fuzzy region, full of systems that were somewhat lifelike. Some could copy their patterns imperfectly. Some could harvest energy from their surroundings. Some could grow and divide. None were perfect. Many vanished. But little by little, the more stable, the more self-sustaining loops came to dominate the landscape. If that feels abstract, you can soften the picture. Instead of imagining intricate chemical diagrams, imagine a slowly forming village. At first, there are only a few paths crossing an empty field. Then someone builds a fire pit near one path. People start to gather there. A well appears, then a shelter, then more paths. There is no single moment when the village appears, no single house that makes it official. But eventually, if you zoom out and look, you can see that something new has emerged. In the same way, life's earliest forms may have been less like individual houses and more like clusters of paths and meeting points. Reactions linked together in ways that allowed them to persist, to grow, to spread. The membranes that formed around them, the strands that carried rudimentary information, the building blocks that kept arriving from the environment, these were all parts of the village, emerging step by step. As you lie there listening, you don't have to hold on to every part of this story. The main feeling to keep, if any, is that life didn't begin with a sudden, perfect creature, but with a long, patient unfolding of chemistry into something just organized enough to keep going. From there, over immense stretches of time, the familiar forms we know, cells, microbes, plants, animals, would slowly branch out. For now, you can simply rest with this idea. Somewhere, in the warm, shifting waters of a very young Earth, tiny droplets and fragile strands began to work together in ways that allowed their patterns to last. The first life on Earth wasn't what we usually think of, a neat, single organism, but a gradual, blurry process. And you, breathing quietly in the dark, are one of its distant consequences, listening to your own origins as you drift towards sleep. If you're still awake, you can let yourself settle a little more deeply now. And if you drifted away for a while and have just come back to the sound of this voice, that's perfectly okay. There's nothing you missed that you absolutely have to recover. This isn't a story with a test at the end. It's more like a long, gentle tide that you can step into at any point. Notice your body again, if you want to. The way it's resting. The way the mattress or sofa or blanket is holding you. You don't have to change position unless you feel like it. Just sense the weight of yourself pressing down, the way gravity quietly keeps you anchored. That simple, unsteady pull has been shaping this planet since long before life existed, and right now it's simply keeping you supported. Feel your breath too, that familiar rise and fall. Maybe it's slower now than when you first lay down. Maybe it's the same. Either way is fine. Imagine that each inhale gathers a little softness, and each exhale releases a little of what you don't need anymore. Thoughts, tension, effort, they can drift out with the breath and dissolve into the darkness around you. We've been wandering through a very ancient world together, a young Earth wrapped in oceans full of simple molecules slowly assembling themselves into more complex patterns. We've floated among tiny droplets, imagined strands of RNA whispering their instructions in warm water, watched reactions linking into little networks that could almost, but not quite, be called alive. Now we're going to move gently forward in time, just a little, to meet a character who is often mistaken for the very first life, but who probably arrived much later. Something scientists call the last universal common ancestor. You don't need to remember that phrase. We can simply call it an ancient ancestor, a kind of trunk from which all known branches of life spread. Imagine again that great tree of life, the one that includes everything living on Earth today. Every person you know, every plant, every animal, every mushroom, every bacterium in the soil, every strange microbe in the deep ocean. Instead of thinking of evolution as a ladder, step by step, it might help to see it as this branching tree. Some branches are thick and full of sub-branches, others are thin, ending in little twigs. Many branches broke off long ago and are gone, but if you trace each living twig backwards, down through all its branching points, you eventually reach the main trunk. That imagined trunk is what scientists mean when they talk about the last universal common ancestor. Not the first living thing, but the last shared great-grandparent of everything alive today. You can picture this ancestor not as a single lonely individual, but as a population, a community of tiny organisms that shared a basic plan for how to be alive. It wasn't magic, it wasn't perfect, but it probably had many of the features we see in modern cells, or a membrane to hold its contents, some way of using energy, some machinery for copying information and making proteins. It was already quite sophisticated compared to those early, blurry chemical networks we were visiting before. If it helps, imagine holding a very old, worn book. The pages are frayed, the cover is faded. It isn't the first story ever written, and it won't be the last, but it is the source from which all the later editions, translations, and adaptations have come. The last universal common ancestor is a bit like that old book. We don't have a physical copy, but we can infer what it might have said by comparing all the editions we see around us today. If you look at the DNA of different living organisms, you find similarities that are hard to explain unless they all inherited them from a common source. The way cells translate genetic information into proteins, for example, follows a set of rules that is remarkably consistent across life on Earth. It's as if all the living things around you are speaking dialects of the same underlying language. This shared language suggests that somewhere, deep in time, there was a community of cells that fixed these rules in place. They figured out a workable way to store information, to read it, and to turn it into structures and tools. Once that system was established and passed on, it became very hard to replace. Changing the basic rules would be like changing the shape of the letters in an alphabet overnight. Suddenly, all existing books would become unreadable. So you can think of this ancestral community as the moment when certain choices became locked in. Choices about which molecules to use for information, which kinds of membranes to build, which basic strategies to rely on for energy. It was not the beginning of life's story, but rather a point at which the story settled into a particular style, one that would echo through all its later chapters. If the last universal common ancestor is the trunk of the tree, the first living systems are deeper still, down in the roots. They are harder to see, buried under layers of time and change. The trunk is already a solid, recognizable structure. The roots are tangled, merging into the soil, blending with the environment. It's much harder to say where the tree ends and the ground begins. When people hear the words first life, they sometimes imagine something like the trunk, a fully formed cell suddenly appearing. But it's more likely that the first life was a swirl of root-like systems, protocells, reaction networks, droplets and strands slowly becoming more integrated. The trunk, the last universal ancestor, is what remained after many of those early experiments had come and gone. You can let that settle in your mind without needing to follow every detail. The first life is messy, blurry, almost dreamlike. The last universal common ancestor is a clearer, more defined. Both are important, but they live at different depths in time. Now imagine zooming in on that ancient trunk. We'll picture one tiny cell, not because there was only one, but because it's easier for our minds to hold. The cell is microscopic, floating in a warm, watery environment. It has a membrane around it, made of lipids arranged in a sheet that curves around to form a bubble. Inside there is water mixed with all kinds of molecules, strands of genetic material, fragments of proteins, energy carriers, ions. This little cell has a way of harvesting energy from its surroundings. Maybe it uses chemical gradients, much like modern microbes around deep-sea vents. Maybe it captures bits of energy from molecules in the water. Whatever its method, it is not just drifting passively. It is constantly busy, in a microscopic kind of way, keeping its internal pattern going against the natural tendency of things to fall apart. It also has a way to copy its genetic material, not perfectly, but well enough. Each time it copies itself, small mistakes slip in. Most of these mistakes are unhelpful, making the cell a little less efficient at staying alive. But every now and then, a mistake might create a tiny improvement, a slightly more stable protein, a slightly better energy system, a slightly more robust membrane. When the cell divides, its contents are split between two daughter cells. Over many generations, these small changes accumulate. Trails of difference begin to branch out. Some lineages become better adapted to certain environments. Others fade away. As time passes, the tree of life begins to spread its first tentative branches. The important sleepy thought here is that by the time we reach this trunk, this community of ancient ancestors, we are already standing on a great deal of history. Many forms of almost life, many unsuccessful networks and broken patterns have come and gone. The trunk is what remains, what succeeded well enough to persist and diversify. It is not the spark itself, but the flame that finally caught after many attempts. There's a gentle lesson in that if you want there to be one. In your own life, you might sometimes feel pressure to get everything right the first time, to find the perfect path immediately. But the story of life suggests that experimentation, imperfection, and countless small attempts are not just acceptable. They are how complex things come to exist at all. Most early experiments in being alive didn't last. And yet, out of all those failures and partial successes, something stable and enduring emerged. You might picture those early cells as small, leaky experiments. Their membranes are not perfectly sealed. Their genetic copying mechanisms are not perfectly accurate. Their internal chemistry is not perfectly tuned. And that's okay. They are still beautiful in their own way, fragile pockets of order in a restless world. As you lie there now, you too are a kind of pocket of order, a structure that holds together, breath after breath, thanks to many delicate processes happening inside you. Your cells are far more complex than those ancient ancestors, but they are built on the same basic logic. Membranes, energy use, information storage, copying. The details have changed, but the deep patterns are familiar. If you think about it for a moment, there's something soothing about this continuity. You're not separate from the story of life on Earth. You're one of its latest pages. The machinery that pumps your heart and fires your neurons is an evolved version of machinery that has been working in some form for billions of years. Tonight, that machinery is simply being given permission to rest as much as it can, while you drift between wakefulness and sleep. Now you might wonder, if those early ancestors were so important, do we have any direct evidence of them? Can we see them in the rocks or in fossils? The answer is that it's very difficult. Cells that small, that fragile, living that long ago, are hard to preserve. Time, heat, and tectonic activity have rewritten the surface of the planet many times since then. What we can do, though, is look for clues. Tiny hints in stone and chemistry that whisper to us about that ancient world. Imagine holding a very old smooth pebble. On the surface you can't see much, but if you could examine it at an atomic level, you might find traces of how it formed and what was around when it solidified. Scientists do something like this with ancient rocks, looking for patterns that suggest life was present. One kind of clue comes from structures called stromatolites. These are layered formations created by communities of microorganisms, often microbes that build mats on the seafloor or in shallow waters. Over time, these mats trap sediment and minerals, creating old, domed shapes. Modern stromatolites still exist in some places, and very old rocks preserve similar patterns, suggesting that microbial communities were already at work billions of years ago. You can imagine these stromatolites as ancient microbial cities. Not cities with streets and buildings, but with layers and layers of living films, each generation building on the remains of the last. If you were to skim over the surface of a shallow ancient sea, you might see them as low, rounded mounds rising from the bottom, quietly processing sunlight or chemicals, busy in their microscopic way. Another kind of clue comes from the ratios of different forms of certain elements, known as isotopes, found in old rocks. Living organisms tend to prefer certain isotopes over others when they build their tissues. This preference leaves a kind of chemical fingerprint. Billions of years later, we can sometimes read that fingerprint in the rocks, even when the original cells are long gone. It's a bit like finding footprints in snow that has almost melted. The edges are blurred, the details are faint, but you can still tell that something passed through here. You might not know exactly what kind of creature it was or how it moved, but you can be fairly sure that the pattern wasn't made by random falling snow alone. Of course, these clues are delicate. The rocks have been heated, squashed and altered many times. Signals can be distorted or erased. Scientists have to be cautious, comparing different lines of evidence, checking and rechecking their interpretations. The earliest chapters of life story are written in a script that has been smeared and overwritten many times. There's a humility in that. We like clear beginnings and clean answers, but here we are faced with a past that refuses to be neatly pinned down. We may never know exactly when the first life formed, or what it looked like, or how many different versions of almost life came and went before something truly stable emerged. Those details are lost to time, yet this uncertainty doesn't have to be frustrating. It can be comforting, like a lullaby that doesn't explain every word but still makes you feel held. Not everything needs to be fully understood for us to feel connected to it. You are part of a story whose first chapters are blurry, and that's all right. The fact that the story reaches all the way to you is, in itself, quietly astonishing. You might think of humans in this context as small, curious creatures sitting by the shore of a vast ocean of time, picking up a few pebbles and shells, trying to guess what lies beneath the waves. We have learned a lot. We have maps and models and experiments, but there is so much more than we can ever hold in our hands. The ocean is deeper than our memories, broader than our imaginations, and yet we keep going. Over generations, people have looked at rocks and fossils, run experiments in laboratories, built instruments that can measure the tiniest variations in isotopes. They've shared their findings, corrected each other, revised their ideas. Slowly, out of all this effort, a picture emerges, not complete but rich enough to give us a sense of where we came from. There is something quietly inspiring about this, even if your eyes are heavy and your thoughts are floating. Tiny, fragile beings, living for a few decades at most, manage to piece together a narrative that stretches across billions of years. We are not required to do this. The universe would continue without our diagrams and theories, and yet here we are trying to understand. Maybe as you listen you can feel a small warmth in that. The warmth of belonging to a species that is capable of curiosity, even in the face of such overwhelming scales. The warmth of knowing that our attempts to understand are themselves a product of that very same story of life. A cell that long ago figured out how to copy its DNA, set into motion a chain of events that eventually produced you lying here, listening to these words, wondering about the first life on Earth. If that feels too big, you can let it blur at the edges. You don't have to keep the whole picture in focus. You can let it fade into a soft background, like distant stars you know are there even when you're not looking directly at them. Right now, what matters most is that you are safe. You are breathing. The surface beneath you is holding you up. Your thoughts can be as fuzzy or as sharp as they want to be. You don't have to untangle every root of the tree of life, or read every faint line in the rocks. It's enough to know that the first life on Earth was not a single neat event, but a gentle, some prolonged unfolding. A conversation between matter and energy and time. Soon we'll begin to connect this ancient story directly to your own body, to the everyday life around you, to forests and oceans and star-forged atoms. But for now, you might let yourself rest in this in-between place, halfway between chemistry and biology, halfway between waking and sleep. If your eyes are still open, you can let them grow heavier. If they're already closed, you can let the darkness behind them deepen. The young earth spins slowly beneath you in your imagination. The early seas murmur softly. Tiny cells, long gone now, go about their microscopic business in that distant past. And you, carried by the long arc of their descendants, are here, breathing, drifting, and gently, quietly letting go. If you've been listening for a while and your mind is drifting in and out, you don't need to gather anything back together. You don't have to remember where we were or what we said. You can just arrive here exactly as you are and let this be another soft wave passing through a very quiet evening. If you're just joining now, that's all right too. This can stand on its own like a calm chapter in the middle of a very long, peaceful book. Take a tiny moment to feel your body again, the way it's resting, the points where you're in contact with the bed or the pillow, the weight of your head, the curve of your shoulders, the length of your legs. Nothing needs to be adjusted or fixed. However you're lying right now is perfectly acceptable. You might notice one place that feels especially supported, as if the mattress is rising up just a little to meet you there, holding that part of you without any effort from your side. Let your attention brush very lightly over your breathing. It doesn't have to be deep. It doesn't have to be slow. It just is. Air coming in, air going out. Perhaps you feel it most in your nose, a coolness on the inhale and a gentler warmth on the exhale. Or maybe you feel it in your chest, the way it gently expands and settles, like a small wave lifting and lowering a boat on a still lake. As you breathe, you might remember, dimly or not at all, that we've been wandering through the very early history of life on Earth. The young planet, the ancient seas, the first building blocks of life, the blurry chemistry that slowly became more organized. And we've met in the distance that ancient common ancestor of all life alive today, the trunk of the great tree that includes you as one of its leaves. Now we're going to gently bring that story closer, out of the distant oceans, out of the invisible droplets, and into your own body, your everyday life, the world you move through when you're awake. We'll move slowly, like someone walking through a quiet forest path at dusk, pausing now and then to look up at the canopy and down at the tiny details by their feet. You might start by bringing your awareness, just for a moment, to your own cells. You can't see them, of course, but you can imagine them. Trillions of tiny compartments, each one a little world. Inside, water and molecules and structures and constant motion. Your brain cells, your muscle cells, your skin cells, all sharing the same deep ancestry as those early forms we've been talking about. Inside nearly every one of those cells there is a molecule called DNA, coiled up and carefully stored. It's the modern descendant of those early information-bearing strands we imagined in the ancient seas. DNA holds instructions for building proteins, for organizing membranes, for coordinating all the little tasks that keep a cell alive. Those instructions are specific to you, your hair color, your height, your particular quirks, but the way they're written, the alphabet they use, is incredibly ancient. The same goes for the way your cells use energy. Right now, as you lie here, your heart beating quietly, your lungs breathing, your brain gently processing thoughts and dreams, your cells are using a tiny molecule often called ATP to carry energy from one place to another. This little molecule is like a rechargeable coin. Cells earn it by breaking down food or using gradients, and they spend it to power movement, build structures, send signals. What's comforting, perhaps, is that this system, DNA, RNA, proteins, ATP, is not new. It's not some untested invention that might fall apart any second. It's a refined version of machinery that has been honed through billions of years of trial and error. The same basic tools have been passed down from those early ancestors through countless generations of microbes and plants and animals, all the way to you. You can imagine each quiet heartbeat as an echo of the ancient rhythms of early life, pulses of energy flowing through tiny protocells and microbes. Every breath you take is part of a chain that began when the first life forms learn to harvest energy from their surroundings and to use it to maintain their structure against the pull of disorder. The details have become more elaborate, but the underlying story is continuous. As you lie here, with your eyes perhaps closed and your body perhaps heavy with tiredness, you are being held together by this ancient choreography. Proteins folding and unfolding, membranes maintaining their balance, DNA being read and copied when needed. None of it requires your conscious attention. You don't have to remember how any of it works. Your body is carrying on with the quiet expertise of a process that began in those distant warm oceans. Now let your imagination drift outward from your own body into the world around you. Imagine the soil beneath the building you're in, or beneath the street outside, or beneath the nearest patch of grass or trees. That soil is not just dirt. It's a bustling community of microbes, bacteria, archaea, fungi, busy breaking down fallen leaves, recycling minerals, forming relationships with plant roots. These tiny organisms are living in ways that are still close, in many respects, to those ancient modes of life. They don't look dramatic from our scale, they don't roar or flash, but they are carrying forward very old strategies. Some harvest energy from sunlight, others from chemicals in the soil. They exchange genes, form biofilms, create microenvironments. They are in a sense tiny librarians of life's earliest chapters, still using methods that have been refined but not replaced. Imagine for a moment zooming down into that soil. The grains of sand and particles of organic matter loom large. Between them, thin films of moisture cling, and within those films, microbes drift and cling and cluster. They form mats and colonies like miniature stromatolites, layered communities reminiscent of those ancient structures in the fossil record. You can think of them as a quiet choir, humming softly beneath our feet, all day and all night. You never hear them with your ears, but they are there, shaping the world in subtle ways. They fix nitrogen, making it available to plants. They break down dead material so its components can be used again. They participate in cycles of carbon and sulfur and many other elements. Without them, the world you know would quickly become unrecognizable. The same is true in the oceans. In the surface waters of the sea, tiny photosynthetic microbes float in unimaginable numbers, capturing sunlight, releasing oxygen, forming the base of marine food webs. In the dark depths near hydrothermal vents, other microbes use chemical gradients instead of sunlight, much as early life may have done. Around them, entire ecosystems cluster, built on the energy these invisible creatures unlock. Even in your own body, microbes are keeping you company. In your gut, on your skin, in your mouth, a diverse community of microorganisms lives and works. They help digest food, train your immune system, and occupy niches that might otherwise be taken by less helpful species. You don't see them, but they're there, like tiny housemates going about their business in rooms you rarely visit. All of these microbes, beneath your feet, in the oceans, inside you, are part of a vast, continuous thread stretching back to the earliest life. Their ancestors survived mass extinctions, climate swings, shifting continents. They adapted to deserts and deep seas, to boiling springs and frozen ground. When you think of life on Earth, it can be comforting to remember that in many ways, microbes are the main story, and everything else, trees, whales, humans, is an elaborate side branch. Now, let your awareness drift from the invisible to the visible. Imagine a forest, perhaps one you know, or one you've only ever seen in pictures. Tall trees rising, their branches interlacing to form a canopy. Leaves catching sunlight shimmering a little in the breeze. moss clinging to rocks, ferns unfurling on the forest floor, the smell of damp earth and plants, and maybe a hint of something sweet and floral. Every one of those plants is a highly organized assembly of cells, roots reaching down into the soil, forming partnerships with fungi that help them gather nutrients, trunks and stems holding them upright, full of transport systems that move water and sugars up and down, leaves full of chloroplasts, tiny structures descended from ancient bacteria that learn to use sunlight, now living as symbionts within plant cells. This forest is not separate from those warm ancient seas. It is one of their distant descendants. The experiments that began in droplets and protocells have, over time, produced all this complexity. Branches, flowers, seeds, birds, insects. When you look at a tree in this way, it becomes a living archive of early life successes, not in the sense of written records, but in the sense of embodied strategies. Ways of using energy, of reproducing, of surviving, that have proved workable over and over again. The same is true of a coral reef, if you imagine one. Bright branching structures in clear water, built by tiny animals that host photosynthetic algae in their tissues, fish weaving between the coral, crustaceans hidden as in crevices, soft corals waving gently into the current. Beneath the colours and movement, the same underlying story plays out. Cells with membranes, DNA, energy systems, all derive from those earliest experiments. Even something as simple as a patch of moss on a stone or a line of lichen along a branch is part of this living archive. Each organism is a record of what has worked for life so far in that particular niche under those particular conditions. You don't have to know their names. Just knowing that they are there, quietly continuing the story can be enough. Now, if you like, you can zoom out even further, beyond forests and reefs and fields, beyond cities and mountains, into space. Picture the Earth, floating against a backdrop of stars, a small blue and white sphere, thinly wrapped in air, lit on one side by the sun. From far away you can't see the details. You can't see people or trees or oceans. You just see a faintly glowing ball. The elements that make up this planet, and your body, were forged long before Earth even existed. Many heavy elements like carbon, oxygen, nitrogen and iron were formed in the hearts of long-dead stars and scattered into space when those stars ended their lives. Over time, these elements collected into clouds, then into new stars and planets. Earth is one of those planets. You are, in a very literal sense, made from this star-forged dust. When those starborn atoms settled into early Earth, they participated in the chemical dance we've been describing. They dissolved in water, joined into molecules, fell apart, joined again, eventually becoming part of those ancient protocells, and later the first true cells. Each step carried their story forward. From the interiors of stars to the simplicity of early chemistry, to the first life, to microbes, to plants and animals, all the way to you lying here in the dark, breathing gently. If you find it soothing, you can rest for a moment in that sense of connection. You're not separate from the universe, dropped into it like a visitor. You're a local expression of it. The atoms in your hands and heart and thoughts have travelled a long way to get here, and they will travel on after you are gone, becoming part of other stories, other forms. There is a kind of belonging in that, a deep sense of being at home in a very wide, very old cosmos. You don't have to feel anything particular about this. Some nights it might make you feel small and peaceful. Other nights it might spark a sense of wonder. And sometimes it might just be a neutral fact that drifts by while you're mostly focused on your own worries and hopes. All of those responses are okay. You're still part of the story regardless of how you feel about it. Now we return to a more intimate scale. You, here, now, with your own private uncertainties and questions. Just as scientists will probably never know every detail about how the first life began, you might never have complete answers about where your own path is headed. There are things that are clear to you, and things that are confusing, decisions not yet made, feelings unsorted. It's natural to want clarity, but the story of life suggests that uncertainty can coexist with growth. Early life did not start with a detailed plan. There was no blueprint pinned to the wall of the universe, no schedule, no final design. There were just conditions and possibilities and time. Out of that, complexity emerged, not in a straight line, but through wandering trial and error, and many departures that led nowhere in particular. In your own days, you might try things that don't work out the way you hoped, habits that don't stick, projects that fizzle, paths that turn out to be cul-de-sacs. It doesn't mean you're failing at being alive. It might just mean you're participating in the same pattern that has always guided life, experimenting, adjusting, slowly finding what sustains you. Think of that ancient, messy process as a kind of metaphorical reassurance. Just as life found a way from chaos into complexity, from random chemistry into structured cells, you can find small pockets of calm and meaning amid whatever chaos your mind or your world is offering right now. Not all at once, not by force, but gradually, through small, quiet steps. Those steps might be as simple as noticing your breath when you remember to, letting your shoulders drop when you catch them creeping up, speaking kindly to yourself in moments when your instinct is to be harsh, reaching out for help when you need it, allowing yourself to rest when you're tired instead of demanding constant productivity. The origin of life itself is a question that may never be fully answered. Scientists can come close, can narrow the possibilities, can test ideas and discard others. But there will likely always be a bit of mystery, a soft, unexplained glow at the center of the story. That mystery doesn't make the story less real. It makes it feel, in some ways, more like the way life actually feels from the inside, partially known, partially uncertain, always unfolding. You can carry that gentle mystery with you as you drift towards sleep. You don't have to solve it. You don't have to decide whether the first life began in a shallow pool or a hydrothermal vent or some other niche. You can let those possibilities float around like distant stars, small points of light in a wide, dark sky. You, wrapped in your blankets, are under the same sky, made of the same elements, participating in the same ongoing story. And if your mind tries to grab onto worries about tomorrow, about yesterday, about things undone or unsaid, you can imagine placing them just for now in that same sky. Not throwing them away, not denying them, just setting them gently on a shelf among the stars where they can rest. You can return to them later when you're more resourced, more awake. For now, you're allowed to be just another living thing on a very old planet, resting in the dark. Life, from its earliest beginnings, found ways to persist in harsh conditions, to adapt to changes, to survive extinctions and upheavals. You're carrying that resilience in you, even if you don't always feel it. The same deep processes that kept tiny cells going through ancient storms and shifting climates are, in a very real sense, the ancestors of the processes that keep your heart beating calmly now. As you breathe, you might imagine those early oceans again, not as something separate from you, but as a kind of ancestral dream. Waves rolling in, waves rolling out, droplets forming and dissolving, tiny patterns learning to hold together. Out of all that patient unfolding, here you are, a mind allowed in this moment to do nothing but rest and drift. You don't need to hold on to any of this. You don't need to be able to explain it to anyone. The story can just be a background murmur, like the sound of rain on a window or distant waves on a shore you can't quite see. If sleep is beginning to tug at you, you can let it. If you're still awake, that's okay too. We'll soon slide into an even simpler, more repetitive, more dreamlike phase of this journey, where the words themselves become softer and fewer, and the science blurs into something more like a lullaby. But for now, just notice one more time that you are here, that you are breathing, that you are in every cell, a continuation of a very old, very patient experiment called life on Earth. And that, for this quiet stretch of time, you are being given permission to do the most ancient, natural thing of all, to rest. If you're still here with me and somehow still awake, you're doing far more than you need to. You don't have to hold on to anything we've talked about so far. You don't have to remember where we started or where we're going. You can just lie the way you are, in whatever position feels easiest, and let this next stretch of words be like a soft, slow current that you're floating on. Maybe you feel a little heavier now than when you first press play. Maybe your thoughts are slower, or maybe they're still wandering all over the place. Either way, it's okay. Minds wander, bodies fidget. Sleep comes when it's ready. Your only job right now is to exist, to breathe, and to let yourself be carried. If it feels comfortable, let your attention visit your breath once more. Not as a task, just as a gentle check-in. Notice the natural rhythm that's already there. In and out, in and out. As you breathe in, you might imagine a quiet sense of ease flowing in with the air. As you breathe out, you might let go of a little more of the day. Tiny bits of worry and effort drifting away like dust motes, floating out through an open window. We've travelled in our imagination through young oceans and early chemistry, through tiny protocells and ancient microbes, through forests and coral reefs, all the way out to the stars and back into your own body. We are going to let the details soften. We'll keep just a few simple images and let them repeat and repeat again, like waves returning to the shore. You can imagine, if you like, that you're floating above an ancient sea, the same young Earth we visited before. The sky is dim and gentle, some colour between blue and grey that doesn't have a perfect name. The water below you is dark but calm, its surface marked by long, slow swells. There is no rush here. The waves move like a giant creature breathing in its sleep. You are weightless in this scene, held in a little bubble of safety. The air around you is warm and kind. No wind, no sting, just the feeling of being suspended, as if gravity is momentarily gentler. You can't fall, you can't get lost. You are simply carried where the soft currents want to take you. Beneath the surface of the water, things are quiet. No fish, no plants, no coral reefs yet. Just the slow movement of water and the drifting of invisible particles. Deep down, there may be places where warm water rises from the seafloor, bringing with it minerals and strange chemistries. In shallower spots, sunlight filters through, turning the water a hazy, peaceful colour. In this water, tiny molecules are moving. You don't need to name them anymore. Just think of them as small, simple pieces, shifting and bumping gently against one another. Every so often, some of them stick together. They form little chains, little rings, little clusters that stay intact for a while before gently coming apart again. Again and again, quietly, slowly, new clusters form and dissolve. Warmth passes through, light passes through, time passes through. There is no hurry. The ocean has all the time it needs. In some corners of this sea, droplets form, little blobs enclosed by thin skins, like delicate bubbles you can't see, each holding a tiny world inside. Some are empty, some hold just a few random molecules, some happen by chance to gather combinations that can copy themselves, or help reactions along, or hold on to energy just a bit longer. You can imagine shrinking down toward one of these droplets. You become very, very small in your mind, drifting downward through the water until you are no bigger than one of these tiny spheres. All around you there are countless others, like a field of very faint stars in a dim sky. They shimmer, move, merge, split. A quiet ballet of appearing and disappearing. Picture one of them glowing very softly, just enough for you to notice it. It's not actually shining, but you can choose to see it that way in your visualization. Inside that droplet, simple patterns are repeating. Molecules are lining up, linking, copying parts of themselves. Not perfectly, not with intention, just because the conditions happen to allow it. Over and over, these patterns repeat. Again and again they're nudged by warmth, by currents, by chance. Most of the time they fade, but sometimes one of them lasts a little longer, or copies a little more effectively, or holds on to its energy a little better. The droplet divides, and some of that pattern continues in a new home. Quietly, slowly, over vast stretches of time, these repeating patterns become more stable. They start to look a little more like what we might call life, not in a sudden jump, but in countless tiny steps. A little more order here, a little more persistence there, a little more ability to keep going, to maintain a boundary, to use energy. You don't need to follow the chemistry now, you can just think of it as simple molecules learning to stay together. Learning, in a way, to remember their own shape. The way you might draw the same pattern over and over in the sand, and each time it becomes easier to trace. Above all this, you still float in your safe bubble, watching. You're separate and untouchable, just an observer in your own dream of this ancient world. The water moves gently beneath you, the waves roll, the tiny droplets dance, and through it all, you continue to breathe in your own time, in your own room, far in the future. If your mind wanders away from this image, that's okay. Maybe it drifts to something that happened today. Maybe it drifts to a random thought, or a half-formed dream. When you notice that, you can gently, quietly return to the sea. Let the thought you were having dissolve into the water like a grain of salt. When you come back, the waves are still there, still moving, still peaceful. Now let's shift the view a little. Imagine that instead of hovering above the water, you are floating just at the surface, lying on your back as if on a raft, though you don't even need to picture the raft itself. The sea holds you up. It supports your weight perfectly. With each breath your chest rises and falls, and the water beneath you rises and falls in answer, as though you and the ocean are breathing together. Far off, on the horizon, the faint glow of volcanic islands is barely visible. The sky above is sprinkled with stars, some brighter, some dimmer. Perhaps the moon is visible too, larger than you're used to seeing it now, hanging low and luminous. The air is warm, but not heavy. You are not cold, you are not hot, you are simply in balance. Below you, all that ancient chemistry continues. Tiny patterns forming and fading, droplets drifting, sometimes catching just the right combination. There is no noise in this world, except the gentle lapping of water and the hush of distant geothermal sighs. And even those sounds are softened, as if heard through layers of blankets. In your body now, something similar is happening. Not droplets in ancient seas, but patterns repeating. Your heart follows its familiar rhythm. Your lungs follow theirs. Neurons fire and fade, muscles release and soften. You don't have to direct any of it. It all happens quietly, automatically, drawn along by rules that have been in place for longer than we can easily imagine. Again and again your heart contracts and rests. Again and again air flows in and out. Again and again, cells use their tiny energy coins, spend them, earn them back, spend them again. The details are intricate, but you don't need the details. You just need to know that this deep ancient machinery is on your side doing its best to keep you safe. Let your attention drift now between two images. The first is the ancient sea full of droplets and early patterns. The second is the gentle movement of your own breath, back and forth between them, like a pendulum that is slowly losing momentum, swinging less and less each time, until it comes to rest. Ancient sea, you're breathing. Ancient sea, you're breathing. Warm water, tiny patterns slowly learning to copy themselves. Warm body, quiet breath, slowly letting go of the day. If, at any point, you lose track of what I'm saying, that's all right. The words can just be a soft background noise like distant waves. You don't need to cling to them. They're not instructions you have to follow, they're not ideas you have to remember. They're just sounds arranged in a gentle pattern, here to keep you company as you drift. Over time, those early patterns in the sea became more and more complex. They built cells, communities, forests, bodies, minds. The story stretched out, branching and branching, until it reached this room, this bed, this moment. You are right now one of those distant branches resting at the tip of a very long, very old tree. But you don't have to think about the whole tree anymore. You don't have to think about the roots, or the trunk, or the other branches. You can just be this one leaf at the end of a twig, fluttering very slightly in the breeze of your own breath, getting ready to settle into stillness for the night. As we move toward the end of our time together, the information can become simpler. All you really need to remember, if you remember anything, is something like this. Life began slowly, in warm oceans, with tiny simple pieces, learning to stay together again and again. Those pieces became patterns. Those patterns became cells. Those cells became communities. Those communities became ecosystems. And eventually they became you, a living being lying here, listening, breathing. You don't need to repeat those lines in your head. You don't need to hold on to them. You can let them pass through you like a soft breeze, leaving only a faint sense of calm behind. If the earlier parts of this story felt complicated, now you can let that complexity fade into the background. You can picture the first life not as a diagram or a timeline, but as a feeling. The feeling of warm water moving gently, molecules drifting, a quiet world slowly waking up. Warm oceans, tiny droplets, simple patterns learning to endure. You, here, are another pattern learning to rest. Let's gently gather the main images we've been playing with, like shells collected from a beach at the end of the day. A young earth, wrapped in clouds, covered in oceans, simple molecules wandering, forming and unforming, droplets and protocells, tiny rooms for chemistry to play in, ancient ancestors, the trunk of a great tree of life, forests and coral reefs and mosses, living archives of what worked, your own cells carrying ancient machinery, your body breathing quietly in the dark. All of these are connected, parts of one long story, but you don't have to walk through the story in order. You can let it swirl together into a single gentle feeling of belonging, of being a small, important part of something vast and patient and old. As you rest, you might imagine that those ancient oceans are still with you, not far away in time, but present in the water in your cells, in the salt in your blood, in the rhythms of your heartbeat. The chemistry that once filled great seas now flows through you in miniature, keeping you alive while you sleep. There is a kind of quiet kindness in that. The universe has spent billions of years assembling the conditions that allow you to exist, to feel tired at the end of a day, to lie down and listen to a story about its own beginnings. You don't have to do anything to earn that kindness. You don't have to prove yourself to the atoms that make you. You're already here. That's enough. In a moment, we'll let this story fade even more, tapering off into silence. But before we do, let's offer a soft, brief summary. The way you might close a book halfway through a chapter, content with what you've read so far. We started with a restless young Earth, then watched it cool and gather oceans. We saw simple building blocks forming and combining, becoming more complex. We imagined droplets and protocells and early chemical loops, slowly crossing a blurry line into something we might call living. We met the idea of an ancient common ancestor, not as the first life, but as a later milestone. We traced slender threads from that ancestor into forests and microbes and your own cells. And then we let the complexity dissolve into a few simple pictures. Warm water, tiny droplets, quiet patterns, gentle breaths. You don't have to hold on to the scientific terms or the theories. You don't have to sort out exactly how life began. The important part for tonight is the feeling that you are wrapped in a story much larger than today's worries, and yet that story is gentle enough to fall asleep to. If there is any small comfort you can take from this, let it be this. You carry in your body and your cells the echoes of ancient oceans and early experiments. You're not separate from the world or from the deep past. You're an expression of it. And just as life has kept going through difficulties far greater than anything one person can face, there is a resilient core in you too, even if you don't feel it clearly right now. For this moment though, you don't have to be resilient. You don't have to be strong or wise or productive. You can just be tired. You can just be someone who has done enough for one day and who is now allowed to rest. If any worries or to-do lists try to tug at you, you can imagine placing them gently on the shore of that ancient sea, not pushing them away with force, just setting them down at the water's edge. The tide will come and go, passing over them, softening their edges. They'll still be there when you need them, but they don't have to come with you into sleep. Let your thoughts become a little blurrier around the edges, like shapes seen through water. Let your breath be the anchor that remains, rising and falling, while everything else grows softer and more distant. You are safe here. You're held here. You're allowed to rest here. There is nothing more you need to accomplish tonight. Nothing you need to understand. Nothing you need to fix. The first life on Earth has already done its work. It has carried its patterns through billions of years, across countless generations, all the way to you. Now it gives you this simple, precious moment, a chance to close your eyes and drift. If sleep is already seeping in at the edges of your awareness, you can let go a little more, as if you're sinking slowly into a warm, quiet pool. If you're still awake, you can stay with the sound of the voice for as long as you like, knowing that even the moments of wakefulness are a kind of resting. So for now, let the ancient oceans grow dim in your mind. Let the tiny droplets and the early cells fade into darkness. Let the tree of life recede into a soft, distant silhouette. All that remains is you and your breathing and the gentle sense that you are part of something vast and kind. Good night, little branch of an old, old tree. Good night, small pattern of star-born atoms resting for a while. Good night, quiet mind, whether it is already drifting or still thinking softly. May the rest of this night unfold like a slow, peaceful tide, carrying you wherever you need to go, without effort, without hurry, without end.